Somewhere in the cold, gray waters of the North Atlantic, the most feared warship ever built was still moving. And every navy in the world was looking for it. Not because they wanted to, but because if they didn't find it, it would find them. Welcome back to Epic Stories. If you're new here, you've picked the perfect video to start with. And if you've been here before, you already know we don't do history like a textbook. We do it like a movie. So sit back, because today's story is one of the most intense chases in the history of modern warfare. This is the hunt for the Bismarck. In the spring of 1941, the Second World War was already tearing the world apart. Nazi Germany had rolled through Europe with terrifying speed. France had fallen. Britain was holding on by its fingernails. And the Atlantic Ocean had become a killing ground, with German submarines stalking Allied supply ships almost at will. But Hitler had something worse in mind. He wanted to cut Britain off completely. Starve the island. Sink every ship carrying food, weapons, and soldiers across the Atlantic. And to do that, he needed something that could not just destroy ships, but destroy the will to even try and stop him. That something was the Bismarck. When this ship was launched in 1939, people who saw it couldn't believe what they were looking at. It was 823 feet long. It displaced over 50,000 tons of water when fully loaded. Its armor plating was thick enough to laugh at most torpedoes. It carried 8 massive guns capable of firing shells the size of small cars over distances of more than 20 miles. And it could move at over 30 knots, which for a ship that size was almost absurd. The British Admiralty looked at the intelligence reports and felt something they weren't used to feeling. Fear. Because if the Bismarck got loose in the Atlantic, it wouldn't just sink ships. It would rule the ocean. Supply lines would collapse. The war effort could unravel. Britain could fall. They couldn't let that happen. On May 18, 1941, the Bismarck left the port of Gdynia in occupied Poland, accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. The mission was called Operation Rheinübung, which translates to Operation Rhine Exercise. But there was nothing exercise-like about it. This was real. This was deadly. And the Germans believed it was unstoppable. They almost had a point. British intelligence picked up whispers of the movement almost immediately. Agents on the ground, signals intercepts, aerial reconnaissance. The picture slowly came together. The Bismarck was out. And it was heading for the Atlantic. The Royal Navy scrambled. What followed was one of the most dramatic naval pursuits ever recorded. The British sent ship after ship to intercept the Bismarck before it could break out into open water. Cruisers tracked it through fog and Arctic cold. Destroyers tried to keep up. The tension in London was suffocating. And then, on May 24, 1941, something happened that shocked the entire world. The Royal Navy's most celebrated battleship, HMS Hood, was sent to intercept the Bismarck in the Denmark Strait, the narrow passage between Greenland and Iceland. The Hood was considered the pride of the British fleet. It was fast, powerful, and iconic. Many called it the most beautiful warship ever built. It took the Bismarck less than 8 minutes to sink it. A single shell, fired at long range, penetrated the Hood's deck armor and hit the ammunition magazine. The explosion that followed was so massive that witnesses miles away were thrown off their feet by the shockwave. A ship carrying over 1,400 men sank in 3 minutes. Only 3 survived. 3. When news of the Hood's destruction reached Britain, the country fell into a stunned silence. Then that silence turned into something colder. Something harder. Winston Churchill issued just 4 words. Sink the Bismarck. Now the hunt became something personal. This was no longer just strategy. This was revenge. This was survival. Every available British warship was redirected. Convoys were abandoned. Resources were pulled from other theaters of war. Nothing mattered except finding and destroying that ship. And this is where you have to stop and think about what the Bismarck's crew must have felt. They had just done the impossible. They had destroyed the most feared ship in the Royal Navy in minutes. They were heading into the open Atlantic. The mission was going exactly as planned. But something was about to go wrong. A British aircraft, a Swordfish torpedo bomber launched from the carrier HMS Victorious, managed to score a hit on the Bismarck during the night. The damage was minor, but it mattered. Then, in a stroke of luck that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier, The Bismarck made a navigational error and changed course. British ships lost her completely. For almost 31 hours, the most wanted ship on Earth simply disappeared. The search grew desperate. Commanders were furious. Intelligence officers worked through the night. And then, on May 26, a Catalina flying boat spotted a massive wake in the ocean far below. The Bismarck had been found. But now a new problem emerged. The Bismarck was close to the French coast, where it would come under the protection of German air cover. Once it reached that safe zone, the window would close. The British fleet was running out of time and fuel. In a last desperate move, HMS Royal launched a group of swordfish torpedo bombers. Through heavy weather and dangerously low visibility, the conditions were almost impossible for flying. But they went anyway. One torpedo hit changed everything. It struck the Bismarck's stern and jammed its rudders. The greatest battleship in the world suddenly couldn't steer. It began turning in wide, helpless circles in the middle of the ocean. The hunters had their moment. If you're finding this story as gripping as it felt to live through it, go ahead and hit the like button right now. It really does help this channel reach more people who love history told like this. And if you're not subscribed yet, join the Epic Stories family below. We do this every week. Through the night of May 26th and into the early hours of May 27th, British destroyers circled the crippled Bismarck like wolves. They fired torpedoes. The Bismarck fired back. Despite everything, despite being unable to steer, the crew kept fighting. The ship's guns kept thundering through the darkness. Morning came. And with it, the British battleships King George V and Rodney arrived. What followed was brutal. The two ships opened fire at close range, and simply refused to stop. The Bismarck took hit after hit. Its turrets were destroyed one by one. Fires broke out across the deck. The superstructure was reduced to twisted metal. And still the crew fought. It took over an hour of continuous bombardment before the Bismarck went quiet. The British then fired a final spread of torpedoes. And at 10:36 in the morning on May 27, 1941, the Bismarck slipped beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. Of a crew of over 2,200 men, only 114 were rescued. For decades, debate raged over exactly what sank the Bismarck. The German survivors insisted the crew had scuttled the ship themselves, opening the seacocks to deny the British the satisfaction. British records insisted the torpedoes finished her. When the wreck was finally discovered in 1989 by explorer Robert Ballard, the evidence suggested both sides were right. The torpedoes had devastated the ship, but the flooding from internal scuttling is what pulled her under. Even in death, the Bismarck refused to give anyone a clean answer. There is something haunting about the Bismarck story that never quite leaves you. Here was a machine built to be invincible, and it lasted just 9 days at sea. Here were thousands of men on both sides who never came home. Here was a moment where the outcome of the entire war hung in the balance over a stretch of gray ocean. The Bismarck didn't just symbolize German power. It symbolized the terrifying gamble of war itself. The idea that you can build something perfect, something unstoppable, and still lose everything in a single afternoon. That is a lesson history keeps trying to teach us. If this video gave you something to think about, leave a comment below. Tell me what part of this story hit hardest for you. Was it the Hood going down in 8 minutes? The disappearing act in the Atlantic? Or those final hours when the crew just refused to quit? Subscribe to Epic Stories if you haven't already. Every week we dig into the moments history almost forgot and bring them back to life. Hit the bell so you never miss one. The ocean remembers what we choose to forget. See you in the next one.